more in this computer. Excellent. There we go. So yeah, I wanted to acknowledge that this data science incubator session was inspired by Vincent, who proposed it. Originally, I kind of refused to include it in the data science incubator, thinking that it would be kind of out of the scope of the very focused target of working on best practices. We can always kind of work around tidyverse code. We can not use it if we wanted. But it is so prominent, and these days so many people, including myself, use tidyverse code that it is a good idea to know if we want to include it in our functions, then how to do it in a safe and easy way. And also to realize that we may not need it sometimes, that there may be other things we could do instead of using tidyverse code. In general, the tidyverse code of which we're, the kind of tidyverse code that I'm going to be talking about today is great for interactive use, but the cost of, having made those functions so easy to use interactively, the cost of that is that then it becomes harder to program with them. So that's kind of the topic of today. It's not that the tidyverse code is bad, not at all. I use it all the time. It's just that when you want to write functions with it, you have to be aware of some things that might not be very developer friendly. So the presentation I'm giving today is like a subset of the slides by Lionel Henry, who is one of the two developers of the Erlang package, which powers the tidy evaluation approach that I'm going to be discussing in a moment. And the talk in which he presented these slides was one called Reusing Tidyverse Code in the UseR conference 2019. There have been other similar talks in the RStudio conference 2019 as well. So basically Lionel and the rest of the tidyverse team, I think that they have been making an effort to try kind of present with some patterns, some approaches that allow people to do a lot of things in a relatively simple way, and only to kind of leave only a very small subset of things that you cannot do with these three approaches shown in screen. And that's those things that you cannot do with these simple approaches, then you need like something more hardcore that I'm not going to be covering today. But the focus of today is to show you that with these three approaches, you can reuse a lot of tidyverse code and you can get a lot of things done. And I believe that is mostly the kind of things that we want to do as analysts. So the first topic is subset.data. What does that mean? Well, it looks like the following. So say that we have code like this. This is just analysis code. We have a data set now highlighted in green. Assume that let's pretend that the data set diamonds that comes with the ggplot2 package is the data set that we want to analyze. We want to create a group by cat. Cat is one variable in the data set's diamond. And then we want to summarize the results. And so we create the new variable average, which is the mean of the variable price after removing missing values. So this is like normal analysis code that you may have in your code, and you want to say, wrap this code into a function so that you can reuse it, so that you can change, for example, cat for a different variable, and you can change price for a different variable. So how would you go about that? Okay, so this is another version of the same code where we have removed, I'm going one step back. So where it says group by, it used to say cat, and now we have .data. So .data is just a pronoun, it's a placeholder for the data. So whatever data goes in data, then this placeholder is referring to it. And then with the double square brackets is one way in which you can extract a variable from a data set in general. So now with the double square brackets, you can extract the variable that you pass to by. And the same thing So this might make a little bit more sense in the next slide. Right? The same thing you can do with the variable that you pass to mean. So the one that you want to summarize over, right? So you want to summarize over this variable, and we want to group by this other variable. So the same approach for both. So it's the dot data, which is a placeholder for the data, whatever that is when you call that function. And then you extract the variable with the double square brackets syntax. So before, after, okay? So where we had cats, now we have a placeholder for a variable by, and where we had price, now we have a placeholder for the variable var. And these are all the three arguments of this function. So the data, before it was diamonds, var, which was cat, and var, which was price, and by, which was cat. So does this work? Yes, it does. So this is the function again, just for a reference. So now we have, let's call that function. So we already defined it up here. So let's call it with the dataset diamonds. And then we say diamonds take diamonds and then group mean. So group mean is the function that we wrote. And notice that in this approach, when we subset the dot data, we have to call the functions with quotes. So we are passing strings, right? This feels a little different to what you are used to when you are calling tidyverse functions. And we're going to work around this later. But it is a really safe and easy way to reuse tidyverse code. The only cost, and by cost, I say quote cost, is that you have to type quotes. And that's not a very good reason to, just to save a couple of quotes is not a very good reason to kind of get into trouble when writing your functions. So this approach works really well, is really simple. And the only cost, if you will, is that it doesn't maybe feel that much as tidyverse code, but that doesn't really matter in a lot of scenarios. Actually, many times you do want to be able to pass strings to tidyverse functions, because you may have, the string cat, you may have it in a variable. Maybe you want to pass the cat string inside a variable. So this works, this is creating the groups by cat, and we have here the average for each group. So let's now go to the second approach. It's called, or they gave it, the tidyverse developers gave it the name pass the dots. So pass the dots refers to the ... argument that you might have seen in many functions, including many tidyverse functions. It's also referred to as the ellipsis argument. So now let's pretend that we have this code. Now it's a different data set, but it doesn't matter. Star Wars data set. We want to group by, for example, hair color, which is one variable of the data set Star Wars. And then we want to summarize, in this case, by the variable that we create. We call it count. And what it does is the n, so it counts, and what it does is counts the instances of these groups, of each of these groups. So this is, again, code that we would kind of start with as analysts, and then we want to wrap that into a function. How do we go about that? Okay, this could be the approach. So very simple. Basically, group by and many other tidyverse functions, like filter, for example, take the ... argument, which means that whatever you would pass generally to group by, you could put it in your function. So you write your function so that the signature of the function includes the ... and then you pass the ... argument into group by. So if you do this, then the function will feel very natural if you are used to using tidyverse functions. First, your function will inherit the same behavior that the group by function had. So this is, again, the definition for a reference, and this is how we would call our new function group count. So group count, so we take the dataset diamonds, and then we group count by cat. So notice that now we pass the variable unquoted. We don't need the quotes. It does feel a lot like tidyverse code. And the reason is because all the machinery that makes this unquoted variable work, we didn't have to do anything with that machinery. That machinery lives inside group by. So we just, all we did is with a dot, 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 we passed that variable cat into group by, and then it's now, we delegated the work to group by so that it does whatever it needs to do to understand what cat means. So what it will do is will, you know, as all these type of tidyverse functions, what they do is they look for cat not in the global environment of the user, but in what is called the data mask, which is the data set in which that creates the context for those functions to work. So very simple approach. You just pass the dots and you get the same behavior that you would expect, but that's not all. You also can override names if you want. If you just pass, you know, the right-hand side of this equal equation here, if you wanted to group count by cat parentheses carat comma 3, then the default name that you get is kind of horrible. It's the exact same thing with backticks. So you can create nicer names just by saying what's the new name of the variable that you want, equals, and then the expression that should be evaluated for each of those groups. So it's very flexible. So you inherited the behavior, and you can override names in the same way that you would do with normal tidyverse code. And now your function behaves just like that. So if we call it, this is what we would get. We would get the diamonds data set now grouped by carat, and in the so the way in which the original carat variable was broken was by, you know, in 3 sections, in three pieces, which is what this expression does. And then the third benefit that we get by using this approach is that the dot 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 argument takes any number of inputs. Infinite number of inputs. So you can use only one variable, but you can also use 2, 3, or whatever number you want. So for example, in this case, we pass 3 variables. We pass the variable cat, the variable color, and the variable carat, which we equal to cat carat in 3 pieces. So as you can see, for each of these variables that we pass to our new function group count, we get a new, we get a variable in the output, cat, color, and carat, and then the count, which is what our function does. So the 3 things that we then, the 3 benefits were we inherited the behavior that group by gives us, we were able to overwrite names, and now we also have the benefit of being able to use multiple inputs. And then the third of the 3 approaches that Lionel presented in his presentation is that of embracing arguments. What does that mean? Okay, so we go back to very similar code, actually the same code that we had before. Remember that one of the issues that we experienced then was that our function didn't feel very much like tidyverse code because we were using string variables as opposed to unquoted variables. Okay, with this approach, we will have the capacity to pass variables without the quotes. So again, we started with same code, analysis-like code, and then we wrap it in a function. We have the same arguments that we had before, but now every one of the arguments that we passed to tidyverse code, we wrap them with this curly operator. So we embrace our arguments with curly operators. So this is a shortcut for those who are used to seeing different kind of tidyverse code. This is a shortcut for bang, and QO, which is a combination of 2 functions or a function and 1 operator that did the exact same thing. But this is the latest approach, the recommended approach, because it feels a bit more natural. So the only thing that we did, so we passed the same variables and we embraced them with this curly operator. And then we can just call the function and it will feel very natural. So this is again for reference what the function would look like. We take, for example, the dataset diamonds, and then we group min. And here we go. So we are going to calculate the mean on price. by cat. And this is what we get. So for each group, or for each for each unique value of cat, we get the mean, which is what we calculated of price. Okay, so this feels very much like tidyverse code. It's kind of the same thing that I showed in the beginning, but now we don't need the quotes when we refer to the variable over which, in this case, we want to either calculate the average or we want to group by. And that's about it. So for the cases where neither of these three approaches work, then you are left with a hardcore tidy eval, which means that you have to kind of read probably chapters 17 to 21 of the Advanced R book if you want to really understand the concepts and how to use the R-line package to do tidy evaluation for you. And then the R-line package itself by Lionel Henry and Hadley Wickham is very well documented. So you may also want to read functions there. But again, with what you have in these slides, which comes from these two talks here at the top, from Tidy Eval in Context, RStudio Conf 2019 by Jenny Bryan, and Reusing Tidyverse Code in Use R 2019 by Lionel Henry. These two talks present more or less what I have presented today. And that is mostly the kind of thing that we might want to go. If you want to go beyond that, I would first kind of pause for a bit and make sure that you really, really want to get there, because it takes some effort to learn hardcore tidy evaluation. And if it's not something that you really need, you may use your time more efficiently learning other things instead. So with that, that's the end of the presentation. So I welcome your questions.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mara. That was really useful. With the ...
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that always just the final variables that are passed, or you know, how do you understand what's part of that ... and what's something else? You know, is it all based on the order of the inputs to the function?
Yeah, let's see, for example, if let's see group by, you're right. So the, you know, you can call functions, you're right, by the order of the arguments all the way until you hit the ... And then you have to name the variables explicitly by name. So for example, the function group by uses the approach actually that the tidyverse team has developed as best practice, which is to give you the ... argument as close to the left as possible to force the users to name the arguments explicitly. Maybe that was a mouthful. You need that. So it's true. So you have. Let's find another mean, for example. Same thing. So mean takes one vector and then any number of inputs in any order. So we can do, you know, mean of the sequence 1 to 10. I know, actually. No, that was a bad example. Sum there you go. So sum takes, so you can sum any, so the ... allows you that you can do, I can sum 1 and 2, I can sum 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. So any number of arguments and in any order. So I can do, you know, 5, I can put it here, and it's gonna be the same. Because I am always, so as long as I don't name an argument here, it will be passed to the ... But what I can do is, if I want to refer to the argument NA remove, then I have to name it explicitly. NA.remove equals false or equals true. If I don't name this argument, if I say this, true will be interpreted as probably 1 and will be added to, there you go, it will be added to the other numbers. I think I went off topic. Let's go back to your question. Please confront what you asked with what I said.
That's fine.
That's fine.
So basically you just need to name everything after that.
Exactly.
It eats up all the unnamed arguments that you pass. It eats up all of them. But another like interesting thing, Mara, I'm pretty sure you can take that na.rm equals true and put that as the first argument, and as long as it's named, it will still work the way you might expect it to, which really kind of confuses things. But
yeah, that's right. So
every
name argument will be kind of interpreted outside the idea of by position, you know. So yeah, that's true. It's very confusing. And the only reason why you might want to do something like this is sometimes, you know, if your function takes a lot of arguments and you want to highlight the first argument, so this one argument, okay, you want to tell your user that you are really using this argument, then you know you would probably do it. But I avoid it because it's more confusing than what helps. You know, so I can do something like this to highlight. Okay, I'm calling sum with na na remove equals true, but it's more confusing really. So I prefer to do this.
Thanks.
Mauro, one quick question. So, as you've probably seen already, I was using tidy evaluation helpers.
Mm-hmm.
And so in future, would recommend that I just avoid those and kind of follow one of these 3 approaches, unless for some very, very specific cases necessary.
I think that what you were using was basically the older version of the curly, which is bang bang and kuo, which is fine. I mean, it's one of the 3 approaches that I use, and is considered the relatively simple way of using tidyverse. The issue is that, of course, you know, you start then, you know, getting into muddy terrain. So I would recommend, if you really want to use it, maybe spend some time like learning about it, or just be kind of open to, you know, getting error messages that you don't really know where they're coming from. Or yeah, if you can, avoid it, because you know you might want to kind of use your time, instead of debugging Erlang code, you know, doing something different. If remember, you can just do, you know, data square brackets, double square brackets, and the name of a variable, and then the name of a variable. So let's do it here. So just to review, group mean. So, you know, where it says diamonds, what you want to say is data. Where it says karat, what you want to say here is buy. Where it says price, you want to say variable. So that's the definition of your function. And then where it says buy, you have these 2 approaches. You can either do curly, and best practice is to give a space to just highlight that this is something really weird. Or you can do dot data square brackets, right? And then what you have to pass here instead is a string by. So this will work, right? So you will get used to this. So this is totally valid, and I, you know, that's why, you know, the purpose of this data science incubator is to show you this. So you now are kind of, you have a place, so you can read, you know, 10 slides and remember what you had to do, as opposed to reading the entire, you know, documentation of the Erlang package. Or so yeah, this is just a shortcut for you to work with this. So
No, that makes sense. And
so totally fine if you use it. Yeah, absolutely.
I also have no personal attachment, so I will take your suggested approach.
Okay.
I have a question. or a few. Just the data pronoun, is that like truly the currently used thing? Because having followed this for a long time, been through all the changes, I can't keep track of which one is the most current.
Yeah, I think that most people will, because people tend to like the feel of tidyverse functions. I mean, if you are getting into, I think that if you are using already tidyverse functions, maybe you would see people doing this, I think, more than the .data.
But like just the .data pronoun as a, like it used to be just a dot.
Yeah, that's right.
Are they settled on this .data?
Yeah, now if you do some, let's create a package, create package ABCD. So now if you use tidyEval with a function from the tidyverse package, it already adds the dot pronoun to your global variables. So you guys do from use tidyEval. So just to show you, what's the so what it did, it added the rutils tidyEval. So let's go to that file now. Utils tidyEval. So it added this file to a new package, that function, and let's see what we get for free with them. Let's search for .data. There it is. So you can see that that function, the use tidyEval, already adds the .data pronoun from the Erlang package, which is probably the answer to your question. So I think that what they promote now is the usage of .data as opposed to the just dot.
Yeah.
Mauro, I have one more question.
Should I move?
No, I just for the Shiny, I quite often use the bang same command. So mostly it's like I want to use the variable name, which is like unquoted text. I'm not sure is that the bang sing and bang quo, both of them are like which one is the latest one, or both of them are same.
Yeah, you mean the difference between quo and enquo?
Quo and sim, SYM. I usually use this one, the sim with the.
Yeah, honestly, because I don't use tidy evaluation very often, every time I need to write some tidyEval code, I have to look it up. So probably by now you might know this much better than I. So I don't want to risk giving an answer. I did use tidyEval in one particular package that I wrote like a year ago or so. And at the time I was very fluent, but because I didn't use it, I kind of forgot. So this, my understanding is that this creates a whole quosure, which is a data structure that contains the environment and the variable. And sim, I think all it does is creates a symbol from say something like a name. Now I'm gonna get name without. Let me first ready. So if I do name, I should get the name unquoted, right? So it creates a symbol, but beyond that, I don't know. Yeah. What do you think, Pranav, or someone else in the?
I think that you're right. The symbol only creates a symbol, but it doesn't include the environment that it's in, which then made it. That was the sort of like original solution that they had, but then once you get into a function, then you're in the local environment of the function. So it was necessary to like wrap the environment from whatever the calling environment was. And then they came up with this closure thing. So I think that they both still exist, and the sim might have some use cases in some particular places, but the closure one seems to be more similar to what most people would probably want to do if they want to send an unquoted symbol as an argument of a function. But then the double curly and a bang bang, or like another like iteration of that to make it even more easier to use. And it's definitely hard to keep up with because it's under such heavy development, but that seems to work where they've settled on for now, at least. And it does seem a lot easier to me, the curly thing.
Yeah.
But I also think that I went through a lot of time also trying to replicate the tidyverse kind of style of passing unquoted symbol names.
Mm-hmm.
And but I think honestly, this is only, well, I shouldn't say only, but mostly relevant for this sort of like interactive programming that dplyr kind of has its roots in, which makes it really cool, really simple to understand, but there are consequences to that. And I find when I'm doing a function that's trying to wrap some like dplyr chain like this or something, I almost always naturally want to use strings because maybe I'm like running through a loop of the names of a certain data frame that I have or something. I want to apply that. So like it seems I really don't find much use for it unless I really want to make this fancy function where it just like really feels like dplyr, but I don't feel like I get a whole lot of use out of it unless I'm also trying to create a function that's intended to be used like interactively.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there is a tension between the time that you spend adapting code that you already have. So if you already have something like this, right, like we had before, amounts, and then you start from something like this, usually your analysis, because it's fast and clear to write, and then you want to write a function. So the approach that someone like me or maybe CJ would be doing is, well, we completely rewrite the whole thing and then we create our function. But maybe that takes a lot of time. So maybe if it's just a matter of adapting your tidyverse code very slightly by adding the data pronoun and the square brackets, and then you're done, then probably I would say go for it, because you don't want to completely change that into something like data dot var blah blah blah. So it's up to you really how much time it will take for this code to become a function just by editing the variable and being kind of following this suggestion from the tidyverse team, or completely rewriting it with the square bracket syntax and forget about the tidyverse at all. I feel that because we do use the tidyverse so much, that's why I felt that the suggestion by Vincent was very valid. In the origin, I was kind of more thinking from the developer's perspective, but I think that a lot of us do spend a lot of time working with tidyverse code that we wrote or someone else wrote, and then we need to know these quick approaches to get out of the way, get the job done, like out of the way as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I didn't mean to suggest that I disagree with anything. Just that I've kind of settled on once the dot data pronoun or the dot pronoun was available, then I was like, for me, I was like, this is way easier. I'm not going to mess around with what environment it's coming from. And, like you may think that it's a symbol name, but if that symbol is already attached to an object in your environment, then it's not actually the symbol name, it becomes something else. And it just seems too confusing.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of problems, but it's certainly like a cool way to use them also. I wanted to make one other quick comment that's a little bit like out of scope, but I'm glad that you had these examples with using the double square bracket extraction. That's something that I think a lot of people don't know, and I just was actually explaining this to Vincent earlier today. And it really became relevant when the Tibble package decided to not like auto reduce a one column, one row result subset does, and then people keep getting these errors because they're like, oh, it's the same code, but just because the class has changed to a Tibble, it was not fully extracting. But I think you know what I'm saying. Anyway.
Yeah, I think you referred to what's the argument? I always forget.
Yeah, if it was
drop,
like
right?
one comma cycle.
Yeah, so say 1 comma style and right, and then oops.
Oh, inputs.
Right. So then if you want a data frame, it's like drop equals false, but no one knows about this argument. So yeah. So every time, so maybe to support your comment, so every time you use single square brackets, most of the time you wouldn't want to drop the dimension of the data frame when it becomes only one column. So you might always want to use drop equals true, drops equals false, or you may just, if you really want to drop something, just use the double square bracket. So you would do something like this directly, and then use double. Right. So Pranav, in your question, go ahead.
Oh, just that I see it happening a lot when people are trying to extract one piece of information out of a data frame and then pass that like as an argument to a function.
Right.
And if that thing that they're trying to extract from, but actually subsetting from, is a data frame, like an old style base data frame, it works because it auto does that. But then when the class of that gets changed to a tibble, then it doesn't work because suddenly you get a 1-by-1 tibble. And the argument fails, or the function fails an error because it doesn't know what to do with the tibble because it's expecting like it's just a string or something.
Yeah.
It's a really simple thing, but it seems to come up enough that I'm tempted to do a session about that.
Yeah.
So.
Pranav, about your question or your comment, could you like to add something? Because I'm sure you know way more about quotients and symbols than I do at this time. Is there anything you could add?
No, I think what I wanted to say was like I was using that same with the double bank, but now the curly, I think that would be more a readable approach, I guess. So I would try it. Like I use mainly the shiny, like let's say there are like different variables and I need to capture like which variable is captured and then after do the processing based on that variable. But I need like unquoted one, so mostly I use the same. But I think the curly, that would be like a more readable approach. So I think
yeah, it's nice, it's inspired by the glue package, if people use it. So maybe if someone is familiar with this is string. So, if you have the string, this is S. So the glue package uses this syntax with a curly. So you can inject inside a string whatever you pass inside the curly braces. So they reuse that idea and build the curly, which is pretty neat. I think it's kind of being able to build a mental model from another mental model that people might already have. I think it's a good idea.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Thank you, Mauro.
Thank you all. See you next time.
See you next time.
Have a good Christmas.
Yeah.
Hey, happy holidays. Yep.